There's something about extreme isolation that strips away the noise of civilization and leaves you alone with forces far beyond human control. In the most remote corners of our planet, where rescue is days away and survival depends entirely on your own judgment, the line between rational decision-making and inexplicable intuition becomes critically thin. During my investigations into unexplained phenomena, I've noticed that some of the most compelling premonition cases come from individuals working in these isolated environments. Perhaps it's the heightened awareness that comes from knowing you're truly on your own. Perhaps it's the way extreme conditions amplify every sense and instinct. Or perhaps isolation itself opens channels of perception that our connected world has taught us to ignore. Today I share two accounts from professionals who found themselves facing impossible odds in environments where a single wrong decision means death, not just for themselves, but for everyone depending on their leadership. Both received warnings that defied logic but saved lives. Both had to choose between following protocol and trusting something deeper than training. The first comes from Jake Morrison, a structural engineer working on an Arctic oil platform where temperatures hit 60 below zero and the nearest help is 400 miles away. The second, from Captain Maria Santos, a wildfire incident commander who led her team through an inferno that had already claimed thousands of acres and was moving faster than any fire in recorded history. These testimonies were recorded separately, months after their ordeals, in quiet rooms far from the extreme environments that shaped their experiences. Both individuals still work in high-risk professions, but both carry the memory of moments when their survival, and the survival of others, depended on trusting knowledge that had no rational source. What makes their stories particularly unsettling is how their premonitions manifested under conditions of extreme stress and isolation when the human mind is supposedly least reliable. Logic suggests that exhaustion, cold, smoke, and adrenaline should impair judgment, not enhance it. Yet both individuals describe receiving their clearest warnings precisely when their situations were most desperate. Listen to these accounts and consider, when we're stripped of all the safety nets and support systems of modern life, do we gain access to survival instincts that civilization has trained out of us? Or do extreme conditions simply force us to pay attention to the subtle signals we normally ignore? Story 1. The Arctic engineer account of Jake Morrison, 41 years old, structural engineer. My name is Jake Morrison, and I spent 14 weeks on Polaris Station, an experimental drilling platform anchored 400 miles north of Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. The company said it was the future of Arctic energy extraction. What they didn't mention was that it would become a death trap held together by ice, steel, and the prayers of 12 men who had nowhere to run when everything went wrong. The platform was designed to operate in conditions that would shut down normal rigs. Temperatures that dropped to -60, winds that hit 100 miles per hour, and ice formations that can crush a ship like an aluminum can. But the real challenge wasn't the weather. It was the isolation. When something goes wrong in the Arctic, you fix it yourself or you die. There's no backup plan. I was the structural engineer responsible for monitoring the platform's integrity under extreme ice loading. Every day, I would check stress readings, examine the steel framework for fatigue cracks, and calculate how much punishment the platform could take before critical failure. It was routine work made deadly by the environment. The premonition started during my 10th week on station, in the middle of a storm that had been pounding us for 3 days straight. The ice around the platform was building up faster than we'd ever seen. Massive pressure ridges forming and shifting like slow-motion earthquakes. I was doing my evening inspection when I heard something that shouldn't have been there. A low, rhythmic groaning coming from deep within the platform's structure. Not the normal stress sounds you expect from a rig in heavy weather, but something different, something wrong. I followed the sound to the main support column, a massive steel cylinder that anchored the entire platform to the seafloor. According to my instruments, everything was within normal parameters. The stress readings were elevated but not dangerous. The steel temperature was cold, but not brittle. Every gauge said the platform was handling the ice load exactly as designed, but that groaning sound was getting louder. That night, I had the first dream. I was standing on the platform in the middle of a clear, calm day. No storm, no wind, just peaceful Arctic silence. But the ice around the platform was moving. not breaking up or shifting, moving with purpose, like something alive. The ice formations were growing upward, wrapping around the support columns like fingers, squeezing tighter and tighter. In the dream, I could see the exact moment when the platform would fail. The ice would build up enough pressure to buckle the main support column, and the entire structure would collapse in less than 30 seconds. But what terrified me wasn't the collapse itself. It was the timing. The failure would happen during the morning shift change, when all 12 crew members would be gathered in the central hub. I woke up with the taste of metal in my mouth and the sound of groaning steel echoing in my ears. For the next 3 days, the storm continued, and the ice kept building. Every morning, I would check the stress readings and find them within acceptable limits. Every evening, I would hear that groaning sound getting deeper and more persistent. And every night, I would have the same dream: ice crushing steel, the platform collapsing, 12 men dying because I hadn't acted on a warning that made no engineering sense. By the 4th day, the ice pressure ridges around the platform were over 20 feet high, much higher than our design specifications accounted for. But the computer models still showed the platform could handle the load. The steel faux. Stress analysis indicated we were operating at 78% of maximum capacity. Theoretically, we had a comfortable safety margin, but theories don't account for everything. On the morning of day 13, I was running my routine inspection when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The main support column had developed a hairline crack about 6 feet below the platform deck. It was barely visible, maybe 2 inches long and thin as a paper cut. According to standard assessment protocols, it was a minor defect that could be monitored and repaired during the next maintenance cycle. But in my dream, that exact crack was where the column would fail. I immediately called the platform supervisor, Doug Henley, a 30-year veteran of Arctic operations who'd seen every kind of crisis these rigs could produce. Doug, we need to evacuate the platform. Now. What's your assessment, Jake? The main support column has developed a stress crack. Combined with the current ice loading, I believe we're approaching critical failure. What do your readings show? Stress levels at 78% of maximum. But Doug, the ice is moving in patterns I've never seen. The pressure distribution is all wrong. 78% is well within safety margins. Are you recommending evacuation based on a hairline crack and unusual ice formations? I hesitated. How do you tell your supervisor that you're basing your assessment on a recurring nightmare? How do you explain that your instruments are telling you one thing, but your gut is screaming something completely different? Yes, I'm recommending immediate evacuation. Jake, you know what that costs. We've got 14 weeks of drilling data on this platform. If we evacuate now, we lose everything. Are you absolutely certain? I looked out at the ice formations surrounding us. They were definitely higher and more aggressive than anything I'd seen in my 8 years of Arctic work. But unusual wasn't the same as dangerous. The engineering analysis supported staying put. I can't prove it mathematically, but yes, I'm certain. Doug was quiet for a long moment. He was calculating risk the way platform supervisors do, weighing the cost of evacuation against the probability of catastrophic failure, considering his responsibility to both his crew and his company. I need you to run a full structural analysis and give me numbers I can report to corporate. If we're evacuating, I need engineering justification. I spent the next 4 hours running every test and calculation I could think of. Finite element analysis, fatigue modeling, ice load distribution, thermal stress calculations. Everything came back with the same result. The platform was stressed but stable. The crack was minor. The ice loading was elevated but manageable. By every metric I knew how to measure, Polaris Station was safe. But that groaning sound was now constant, like the platform was trying to tell me something my instruments couldn't detect. At 6 p.m., I made the decision that probably saved 12 lives. I went to the communications room and sent a priority message to our headquarters in Anchorage. Structural engineer recommends immediate evacuation due to imminent platform failure. Ice loading exceeding design parameters. Request emergency helicopter extraction. 20 minutes later, Doug got a call from corporate. They wanted to know if I'd lost my mind. The platform represented a $200 million investment, and evacuation would mean abandoning it to whatever the Arctic winter had in store. Was I really recommending they write off the entire operation based on a hairline crack and unusual ice patterns? Doug found me in the engineering station at 7 p.m. Jake, corporate wants a second opinion. They're sending another engineer out on tomorrow's supply flight. Doug, we don't have until tomorrow. What do you mean? I mean the platform is going to fail in the next 12 hours. Based on what analysis? I couldn't tell him about the dreams. I couldn't explain that I'd been hearing the platform's death rattle for 4 days. I couldn't describe the way the ice looked like it was hunting us. Based on 14 years of experience with structural failure modes and a gut feeling that's never been wrong. Doug stared at me for a long moment. He was weighing everything. My professional reputation, his own judgment, the lives of his crew, and the career consequences of making the wrong call. At 8:15 p.m., he made the announcement. All personnel, prepare for emergency evacuation. Helicopter extraction begins at 600 hours. The crew thought we'd lost our minds. Some of them had been working Arctic platforms for decades without seeing a catastrophic failure. The platform felt solid under their feet. The readings all looked normal. From their perspective, we were abandoning a perfectly good rig because of one engineer's paranoia. But Doug backed my recommendation, and that's what mattered. The evacuation began at dawn. 2 helicopters working in relay to move 12 men and essential equipment off the platform. By 10 a.m., only Doug and I remained for the final flight out. That's when we heard it. A sound like thunder rolling across the ice, but deeper and more complex. The groaning I'd been hearing for days suddenly amplified into something that vibrated through the platform's steel frame. Doug and I looked at each other with the same thought. We were out of time. The helicopter was still 20 minutes away. We grabbed our survival gear and emergency beacon and ran for the platform's edge. The ice around the base was shifting and heaving like something alive, creating pressure ridges that rose and fell with each wave of crushing force. At 10:23 a.m., the main support column buckled exactly where I'd seen the hairline crack. The platform didn't collapse cleanly. It twisted and screamed as 20,000 tons of steel and equipment fought against the laws of physics. The sound was indescribable, like the earth itself was being torn apart. The entire structure tilted 15 degrees to starboard before the emergency supports engaged. But even they couldn't handle the distributed load from the failed main column. Doug and I watched from the ice as Polaris Station, 14 weeks of our lives and $200 million in corporate investment, disappeared beneath the Arctic Ocean in less than 2 minutes. The helicopter found us an hour later, huddled in our survival shelter on the ice floe. We were hypothermic but alive. If we'd been on that platform when it collapsed, we would have died either from the initial structural failure or from exposure in the -40 water. The post-incident investigation concluded that the platform failure was caused by unprecedented ice loading combined with an undetected metallurgical defect in the main support column. The ice formations around Polaris Station had created pressure conditions that exceeded the platform's design specifications by 300%. No standard monitoring system would have predicted the failure until it was too late. The investigators praised Doug and me for exceptional judgment under extreme conditions. They didn't ask how I'd known the platform would fail 12 hours before their models suggested it was even possible. I've worked on 6 more Arctic platforms since then, but I've never experienced anything like those warning dreams again. It was as if the isolation and extreme conditions at Polaris Station had opened some channel of awareness that closed as soon as I returned to civilization. Doug and I still work together sometimes. We never talk about how I knew the platform would fail, but there's an understanding between us. In environments where you're truly alone with forces beyond human control, you learn to trust more than just instruments and calculations. You learn to trust the part of your mind that knows things it shouldn't know. Have you ever been in a situation where your survival depended on trusting instincts that contradicted all logical analysis? Have you ever known with absolute certainty that disaster was coming, even when every system said you were safe? Jake Morrison's experience demonstrates how extreme isolation can amplify our sensitivity to danger signals that our rational minds might dismiss. But what happens when that same intuitive warning system activates in the midst of active catastrophe, when split-second decisions determine who lives and who dies? What happens when a leader must choose between proven tactics and an impossible vision that promises salvation? Story 2. The Fire Captain's Vision. Account of Captain Maria Santos, 46 years old, Wildfire Incident Commander. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been fighting wildfires for 22 years. I've seen fires that moved like hurricanes, burned so hot they created their own weather, and consumed entire towns in minutes. But nothing in my experience prepared me for the Hell Creek fire, or for the vision that saved 19 lives when every tactical manual said we were already dead. This happened last September, during the worst fire season California had seen in decades. The Hell Creek fire started as a relatively small blaze in the Mendocino National Forest, maybe 500 acres. But within 6 hours it had exploded to over 15,000 acres, driven by 70-mile-per-hour winds and feeding on vegetation that hadn't seen rain in 4 months. I was incident commander for Strike Team 7, 19 firefighters in 4 engines, tasked with protecting a cluster of remote cabins in the fire's path. What should have been a routine structure defense turned into a life-or-death escape when the fire behavior exceeded every prediction model we had. The trouble started when the wind shifted without warning. We'd been fighting the fire's eastern flank, using the natural fire break of Hell Creek to anchor our suppression line. But at 3:15 p.m., the wind direction changed by 90 degrees, and suddenly we were no longer fighting the fire. We were surrounded by it. In 22 years of firefighting, I'd never seen flame behavior like this. The fire was moving uphill at 30 miles per hour, throwing spot fires 2 miles ahead of the main front. The smoke column was so massive it was creating its own thunderstorm, with lightning that started new fires faster than we could track them. We had maybe 10 minutes before the main fire front reached our position. I immediately called for air support and emergency evacuation, but the smoke was too thick for helicopters, and our escape routes were already cut off. Highway 162, the only road in or out of the area, was blocked by burning trees. The creek bed we'd planned to use as a safety zone was bone, dry and filled with dead vegetation. According to our training, we were supposed to deploy our emergency shelters and wait for the fire to pass over us. Fire shelters are aluminum and fiberglass cocoons designed to protect firefighters when they're caught in the open. They can handle temperatures up to 2,000 degrees for short periods, but I knew they wouldn't be enough. The Hell Creek fire was burning at over 2,500 degrees, hot enough to melt aluminum. If we deployed our shelters where we were, we'd be cooked alive before the fire front passed. That's when I had the vision. I was standing next to Engine 47 watching the wall of flames approaching from 3 directions, when suddenly I could see a path through the fire. Not around it or away from it, through it. I could see a narrow corridor of lighter fuel load that ran northwest through the center of the burning area, following an old logging road that I hadn't noticed before. In the vision, I could see our exact route, up the logging road for half a mile, then east along a ridgeline that the fire hadn't reached yet, then down into a small valley where there was still green vegetation. The path was maybe 50 feet wide in some places, cutting through the heart of an inferno that stretched for miles in every direction. It was impossible. Every principle of wildfire safety said you never drive toward a fire, never trust a narrow corridor through burning terrain, never gamble 19 lives. On a route you can't verify, but it was also our only chance. Team leaders, gather around, I called over the radio. My crew chiefs, veterans with decades of experience each, jogged over to Engine 47. The main fire front was maybe 8 minutes out, close enough that we could feel the heat on our faces. We're going to punch through the fire front on the old logging road, I announced. The silence that followed was filled with the roar of approaching flames and the crack of trees, exploding from superheated sap. Captain, said Tom Reeves, my most experienced team leader, that road runs directly into the main fire. We'll be driving into a 2,500-degree furnace. There's a corridor of lighter fuel load. If we move fast, we can get through before it fully engages. How do you know there's a corridor? Have you been up that road? I hadn't. I'd never seen the logging road before that moment. According to my GPS, it didn't even exist. It was too old and overgrown to show up on current maps. But in my vision, I could see every turn, Every obstacle, every moment where we'd have just enough space to squeeze between walls of flame. "I can see it," I said. "Captain, with respect, you can't see anything through this smoke. We need to deploy shelters and wait for the front to pass. Tom, those shelters won't protect us from this heat. If we stay here, we die." Another team leader, Sarah Kim, stepped forward. "The standard protocol is to find the largest open area and deploy emergency shelters. We've got maybe a quarter-acre clearing here. It's not much, but it's not enough," I interrupted. "This fire is burning too hot and moving too fast. Our only chance is mobility." I could see the doubt in their faces. These were professionals who'd survived dangerous situations by following proven protocols. What I was proposing violated every safety rule we'd ever learned, but I could also see that they trusted my judgment. In 22 years of incident command, I'd never lost a firefighter. I'd made thousands of split-second decisions under extreme pressure, and I'd always brought my people home. "I need everyone to listen carefully," I said. "We're going to convoy up that logging road in single file. Engine 47 leads, followed by 23, 31, and 15. Keep your intervals tight, but not too tight. If the lead engine stops, everyone stops. If I call for immediate evacuation, abandon the vehicles and deploy. Shelters wherever you are." "Captain," Tom said quietly, "are you sure about this?" I looked at the wall of flames bearing down on us, then at the faces of 19 firefighters who were trusting me with their lives. The vision of the safe corridor was still clear in my mind. I could see every twist in the road, every gap in the flames, every second where we'd have enough clearance to survive. "I'm sure." We loaded into our engines and started up the logging road at 3:22 p.m. The road was barely wide enough for our vehicles. Overgrown with brush and blocked by fallen logs we had to push aside. But it was there, exactly as I'd seen it. For the first quarter mile, we were driving through heavy smoke, but relatively light fire. Flames on both sides of the road, but nothing our engines couldn't handle. I started to think maybe we'd found a genuine gap in the fire pattern. Then we reached the main fire front. Driving through the heart of a wildfire is like entering another world. The smoke is so thick you can't see your own headlights. The heat is so intense it feels like opening an oven door with your face inches from the coils. The sound is indescribable, like standing next to a jet engine while a freight train passes overhead. But the corridor was there. We drove through a tunnel of flame that reached over our vehicles like a living arch. Trees on both sides of the road were fully engulfed, their branches touching overhead. But the road, surface itself, remained just barely passable. It was like following a thread through a tapestry of fire. The scariest moment came at the half-mile mark, where the road made a sharp right turn around a massive boulder. In my vision, I'd seen that this turn would be our closest call. Flames would be reaching across the road from both sides, with maybe 10 feet of clearance for our vehicles. As we approached the turn, I could see that my vision was accurate. The flames were converging, exactly as I'd foreseen, creating a gap that looked impossibly narrow for a fire engine. "All units, we're approaching the critical turn. Keep your speed up and stay tight to the inside of the curve." We made the turn with flames licking our windows and paint blistering on our vehicles. For about 30 seconds, we were driving through what felt like the mouth of a blast furnace, but we made it through. The last quarter mile was the strangest part of the entire escape. As we climbed toward the ridgeline, the fire intensity gradually decreased. Not because the fuel load was lighter, the trees and brush were just as thick as everywhere else, but because the fire pattern had created a natural wind shadow that kept the flames from fully developing. It was exactly as I'd seen in my vision, down to the specific trees that would be burning and the specific areas that would remain passable. At 3:31 p.m., we emerged onto the ridgeline and into clear air. Behind us, the Hell Creek fire was a wall of flame stretching from horizon to horizon. The area where we'd been stationed was now completely engulfed, burning at temperatures that would have killed us even in our emergency shelters. We'd driven through the center of one of the most intense wildfires in California history and emerged without a single injury. The incident investigation praised our innovative tactics under extreme conditions, but couldn't explain how I'd known about the logging road or predicted the fire behavior accurately enough to navigate through the flames. The investigators noted that the corridor we'd used existed for less than 15 minutes before it was completely consumed by fire. If we'd delayed our escape by even 5 minutes, the route would have been impossible. When reporters asked how I'd identified the escape route, I told them it was based on experience and knowledge of local terrain. I couldn't explain that I'd never seen the area before in my life, or that my route had come from a vision so clear I could have drawn a map. Since the Hell Creek fire, I've commanded dozens of other incidents, but I've never experienced another vision like that. It was as if the extreme danger and isolation of being surrounded by fire had opened some channel of perception that only operates under the most desperate circumstances. But I've learned to pay attention to subtler intuitions. When something feels wrong during a fire operation, I listen to that feeling. When a tactical decision doesn't sit right in my gut, I reconsider. I've learned that in life or death situations, your subconscious mind processes information faster and more completely than your rational analysis. My crew still talks about the Hell Creek escape. They call it the miracle run and joke that I must have some kind of supernatural GPS system. But I know they understand what really happened that day. Sometimes, when every logical option leads to death, you have to trust the option that makes no sense at all. Have you ever seen a solution to an impossible problem so clearly that you acted on it despite having no logical reason to believe it would work? Have you ever trusted a vision that saved lives, even when it defied everything you'd been trained to do? Two leaders facing impossible odds in environments where help was hundreds of miles away. Two moments when training and protocol offered no solutions, but inexplicable vision provided salvation. Jake Morrison saw the collapse of an Arctic platform days before engineering analysis suggested it was possible. Maria Santos found a path through an inferno that existed only in her mind until she led 19 firefighters through flames that should have killed them all. What strikes me most about these accounts is how both individuals had to choose between institutional authority and personal intuition under conditions of extreme isolation and mortal danger. Jake had to convince his supervisor to evacuate a $200 million platform based on dreams and gut feelings. Maria had to lead her team directly into a fire when every safety protocol said to stay put and deploy emergency shelters. Both chose to trust something deeper than their training, and both saved lives through decisions that made no logical sense at the time. During my follow-up interviews, I discovered remarkable similarities in how their premonitions manifested. Both described receiving not just warnings but specific, actionable information that proved accurate down to precise details. Jake knew exactly where the platform would fail and when. Maria could see every turn of an escape route she'd never traveled before. This suggests that premonitions in extreme isolation aren't just general anxiety responses, but rather detailed previews of future events. Perhaps when we're stripped of all the safety nets and support systems of civilization, when our survival depends entirely on our own awareness, our consciousness gains access to information that transcends normal sensory perception. But there's an unsettling pattern in both stories. Both individuals had to overcome not just environmental dangers, but institutional resistance to their warnings. Jake's corporate headquarters questioned his judgment. Maria's experienced team leaders resisted her unconventional tactics. This raises disturbing questions about how our systems respond to intuitive knowledge. In crisis situations, when lives depend on rapid decision-making, are we training leaders to trust protocols over instincts? Are we creating institutional barriers to the very kind of awareness that could save lives? 6 months after these interviews, I discovered something that adds another layer to this mystery. Both Jake and Maria reported that their premonitory experiences didn't end with their rescues. Jake mentioned that he sometimes senses structural problems in buildings before they're visible to standard inspection. Maria described occasionally knowing the behavior of fires before weather conditions would suggest such patterns. It's as if their experiences in extreme isolation awakened abilities that continue to function in normal environments, though at much subtler levels. This led me to research other cases of professionals working in extreme isolation. I found accounts of Antarctic researchers who developed unusual sensitivity to weather patterns. Deep sea workers who could predict equipment failures before diagnostic tests showed problems. Mountain rescue specialists who seemed to know exactly where to find lost climbers. All of them described their abilities as extensions of professional experience rather than supernatural phenomena. But all of them also acknowledged that their most dramatic insights came during their most isolated and dangerous moments. Perhaps extreme isolation strips away the mental noise that normally interferes with deeper forms of awareness. Perhaps when we're truly alone with elemental forces, ice, fire, ocean, mountain, we develop connections to natural patterns that our connected, civilized minds can't access. Or perhaps the responsibility of protecting lives in environments where no help is coming forces us to use every resource available to human consciousness, including resources we don't normally acknowledge. The most unsettling discovery in my research was how often these isolated premonitions prove accurate when more sophisticated warning systems fail. Jake's dreams predicted platform failure when engineering analysis showed safe conditions. Maria's vision revealed an escape route that satellite imagery and fire behavior models couldn't detect. This suggests that human intuition, when developed through extreme experience and sharpened by mortal danger, may be more sensitive to environmental patterns than our most advanced monitoring technology. As we continue to automate and centralize our safety systems, we may be losing our connection to forms of awareness that could mean the difference between life and death in extreme situations. Have you ever found yourself in a situation so dangerous and isolated that you had to trust abilities you didn't know you possessed? Have you ever received information about survival that came from no logical source, but proved to be exactly what you needed to stay alive?